good morning. Well, I should say good afternoon from the UK. Good morning and good evening to other people at whatever time you might be watching this. Welcome to another uh, Morbid Symptoms Media Marx Engels Lenin Institute cross stream. I'm happy that
Hello.
Alexander. Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine, yes.
Okay. Welcome him back. We're doing a part two of, let's see, I changed the title a bit to the GenderBorged, the trans left, the supporting men and women's boxing episode, because that's something I learned this week, is that if you're on the left, you need to support men and women's boxing. And if you don't, then you're right wing or a fascist or a racist or a homophobe or a transphobe or some culmination of those. This is what I learned. And I wasn't surprised by learning this, but this is what it was really hammered home, that the consent is being heavily manufactured from this, and primarily on the left. So our episode today isn't going to be only about that, but it's going to be tied into it. Mainly, I don't want to get into the weeds about, genetic testing and all this stuff, but just use as an example of how the left is responding, the left broadly understood. Yeah. And then we'll focus a bit more at the end on particularly Marxist or formerly Marxist institutions, still nominally Marxist, but if they're, that's in this topsy-turvy world, who knows? So anyway, welcome back, Alexander Mckay. I'm happy that you accepted my invitation. And is there anything you'd like to say before we dig into this not problematic or divisive or minefield of a topic at all?
I'll start off with a slightly perhaps facetious comment and then a more serious one. The facetious comment is that you're also a fascist if you actually exercise or go outside, or do anything other than sit in a small apartment playing video games all day. But the more serious point is that, like, at a time when there's an escalating crisis in Europe and in the United States, economic and thus political, so much of the left is still invested in defending this garbage. But also then, if they're not defending it, they're denying that they ever supported it in the first place, or saying that, oh, why don't you go and discuss something else? Because that's the turn now. They've realized this isn't going well. So now it's like, oh, why are you focusing on this? This isn't important. And my response,
why do you care about genitals? Why do you care about genitals, Alexander? That's my favorite one. I'm like, I don't,
Well,
unless it's, my partner.
That's the response of people who, again, it's like throwing out something like an obscene comment, basically, to try and make you not want to discuss anything. But recently, myself and some comrades have been doing a study of like some of Lenin's work, and he has this great line where he says that I'm going to paraphrase it, but Marxism is a comprehensive system through which we see the world, meaning that you have to be able, it can be applied to analyze various different phenomena in the material and the ideological world, meaning that gender ideology and things like that can be made sense of through a Marxist analysis if you're prepared to do one. And of course, these people weren't prepared to do one. They just went along with it because it was mainly because it was an opportunistic thing. And now that they have been on the losing side of this, they don't want to discuss it anymore. So I'll begin by just putting that out there.
Okay. Yeah. And I was surprised, though, how there's still the hardcore people are really doubling down on this, no matter how obvious it becomes that we're watching males punch women in the face as an Olympic event. Even then, they're trying to turn it. I mean, the hardcore people, the people, and that's why I think that we have. I agree with you that there's opportunism. There's just kind of like, not wanting to raise your head above the parapet because of because of the kind of emotional blackmail or the calling of bad words and whatnot. And also somehow this has just been coded as a left issue for some reason. from the very beginning. I think it's just because they thought, well, if gay rights is a left issue, then of course so-called trans rights and non-binary and all this stuff must also be, the next civil rights or, dragon to slay type of thing. But there are still, I think, and this which is we're going to get to towards the end of the episode, because first we're going to talk about three things. There's three things, and I'm gonna have to get my logo off of here because it's irritating me. Or maybe I'll just switch to the okay, yeah. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Um here's a good one. So, and I checked in with Alexander beforehand. I said, okay, I realized that Orwell isn't exactly Marxist, and his Animal Farm was kind of like, I think one of the characters in the Animal Farm was based on Trotsky or something. But I
Well,
go, there's
there's
just
one based on Trotsky and one based on Stalin.
okay. And I was like, but there's so much gaslighting going on that I really got to throw in some Voltaire. And of course, Voltaire was he was born in the late 1600s. So, Enlightenment dude. But there's just so much gaslighting going on that it's just, I had to throw them in there. But so here's the agenda, loosely speaking. So, I don't know if it was a week ago or a week and a half ago. Anyway, a little while ago, when Alexander first came on and we did the, how the left was trans. I shared a couple of clips on X, and they got some, let's just say, the pronouns and the TQIA plus allies were angry. They were hangry, and we're going to talk a bit about the kind of the responses that we got. Big surprise, none of them focus on what we said factually, logically, or theoretically. They just were mainly kind of whinging and nonsense and whatnot. But it is kind of interesting because a lot of the people who responded negatively to those clips of our last episode identify, to use the parlance of our times, as Marxists, as communists, as socialists. Sometimes weird formulations is like, anarcho, trans, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, somebody or other, I don't know. And, we're none too happy. So just to, again, it's kind of funny to see what they say, but also I think we have to take seriously that a lot of people think this way, or they think it's okay, or that for some reason they've been in organizations or around other actual Marxist Leninists who for some reason allow this, I don't know, inanity, nonsense to go undeterred, unchallenged. And what that might mean when somebody is telling you, when you're making a very Marxist materialist statement and they come back, well, you don't know what Marxism is, you don't know what materialism is, and blah, blah, blah. Because I don't know if you know that or not. We were told that several times, Alexander, that we don't know what Marxism is and we don't know what materialism is. Which I
Yes,
thought was
well,
funny.
I saw one comment that says basically because of dialectics, that means that women can become men and men can become women.
Yes.
Basically,
That's how it's supposed to work out.
Yeah, which shows a complete lack of understanding of basic biology again, and the very collapse into idealism that we were talking about, they proved in their responses to the clips you put out. And I think one of the things that you intimated in your introduction, Tara, is that one of the reasons they're so invested in this is a misunderstanding of history. And one of the things they've misunderstood, I think, particularly in the United States, and because we are essentially now more dominated culturally and economically by the United States, the British left has taken this up, which is, you said it was like they saw it as the next civil rights movement. Because this was so that, like, they, in their view, well, civil rights was done, and therefore then it was gay rights, and now it must be this. But I mean, that's an incredibly poor understanding of what the civil rights movement was, which was, well, there was various demands involved in it, but the basic demand is for the one that the ruling class ultimately agreed to, is to at least make a show of equality under the law. That's what they agreed to. The gay rights movement was about, it seems to me, from the vantage point of like being somewhat historically removed from it, but that was also about removing discrimination, removing the regime of discrimination against gay people. This isn't about asking the state to recognize a group for who they are. This is asking the state and wider society to indulge a fantasy.
Yeah.
That's like, there's nothing, I mean, unless it's Rachel Dolezal asking for to be identified as black, like there's no, it wasn't that the people in the black people in the United States weren't identifying as an oppressed group. They were, there were very real laws discriminating against gays and lesbians up until the late 1990s. Those were there, and those were discriminatory, and those were ultimately either lessened or removed. This is asking for something which is a fantasy, literally a fantasy, to be encoded into law. And because that can't be defended in any rational space, that's why they get so hysterical. But the point about the Marxists getting into this, or I should say the so-called Marxists, is because they think that this is because this is popular within a certain tranche of younger people, that this is a way to renew their organizations. And they have revived their organizations. But to quote every headline that's put out there about China's economic growth, at what cost? And the cost is, of course, dialectical materialism, historical materialism, the very basis of Marxism itself. And that's what's happened to a lot of these organizations now.
Yeah, and I agree, is that the idea that somehow and also conflating, the forced teaming is quite good, or cuckooing, if you want to use an older term. People will go like, a cuckoo will go and take somebody else's nest. There's a lot of kind of cuckooing of organizations and movements. But yeah, it's like the idea that at least my understanding of it, and I have some gay friends who were involved in at least in part in the gay rights movement, especially around gay marriage. And it was basically to be like, to get to so you kind of shrug. It's like, if someone's gay, it's like, whatever. There's no reason to be like, okay, that's weird or deviant, or they should be discriminated against. It was like if somebody is gay, same-sex attracted, they shouldn't have to live in fear of that being found out and then having, discrimination in terms, whether it be employment or housing or whatever. So that was fine, totally fine. And then also there's the cultural part by getting people more comfortable with it. And so they got to go from that to being like that, if you're same-sex attracted, that's no reason to discriminate. The gay people, LGBT people should have the same civil rights and political rights as everybody else. Cool, fine. But then the idea that somehow same-sex attraction is the same as wanting the state and everybody to recognize you as something that you are fundamentally not is not the same. It's really not the same, especially because you have, so that never really worked out. But for some reason, it kind of, that's one of the theories about how we got to here, was that organizations that were focused on gay rights had to come up with a new target, or a new a reason for existence, or reason for funding, or whatever. And they kind of a lot of them started to focus on so-called trans rights, or trans rights, or human rights. And I like to ask, like, what rights do people who say they're trans not have in the UK or the US or the United States or Germany or whatever that everybody else has? Because I'm not familiar with any right to pretend that you're the opposite sex and compel others to go along with it, as if that doesn't have any negative side effects, as we're seeing. Yeah. So that never made much sense. But here's so I don't know if you want to. So here's an example. So K.M. Thompson, who is, from what I looked at their bio, I think that this person is most likely a man who identifies as trans. Was none too happy with us, and said, trans people are, in a word, the living proof that gender is an economic prison from which one will never be paroled. I don't know what that means. Ain't I a woman too? Which is from Sojourner Truth, though. So they always want to bring in black people. They always want to bring in black women for some reason, which is really kind of racist. Like, a man who wants to be a woman has anything to do with a black woman. I mean, it's just, but this also happens. I don't know if you're aware of this, but oftentimes when you're getting in an argument or trying to be like, no, men aren't women, someone will ask you, well, what about black women? And it's always like, what? What about black women? They're women.
Black.
So I don't know, and they're black, but
it's not an identity question,
Yeah, it's like, okay. So Ain't I a Woman Too, or Lessons from the Ballroom Reds of Liberal Biology, Proletarian Feminism, and Gender Death from the Perspective of the Dialectical Materialism. A response, and she or he, Dave, I'll just call him Dave.
Hmm.
I don't, uh, a response to me and to you and other liberals pretending to be Marxist. Well, Dave told us, Alexander. Can you make anything out of
Yes.
this?
Well, our friend Dave has used an awful lot of words to say nothing. I mean, look, I'm just going to go through the first sentence there. It reads as follows: Trans people are, in a word, the living proof that gender is an economic prison for which one will never be paroled. None of that means anything.
No.
So, like, there's let's go back to the central part there. Okay, so trans people are the proof that gender is an economic prison. Well, there's again, like, they routinely swap the category of sex for gender, and try and like basically conflate and confuse the two. So, is there a point in that sentence which is that which, if extrapolated properly and dug into, you could find some rational core within it? So you could, if arguing from a certain point of view, you could argue that women under capitalism, working class women, were for quite a long time, and there's an argument to be made that they still are, actually in like more of an economic prison than even the working class men sometimes, because they often have a load of caring responsibilities that men more often than not don't have. So that would be a valid argument. This isn't, though, because this is basically say, I don't know, I kind of know what he's getting at, but the idea that like trans people are like stuck in an economic prison, well, it depends on the person, doesn't it? Like, there's plenty of rich people out there running around cosplaying as the opposite sex. Like, are they trapped in an economic prison? Is that the son of Elon Musk, who is now divorced from or something, who's presumably doing all right money wise, trapped in an economic prison? Or any of the other
Caitlyn Jenner. Martijn
how's old Bruce
Rothblatt.
doing?
Jennifer Pritzker. All these are AGP men, by the way, autogynephilic men who quote unquote transitioned after having long lives and or lives as men, following children and all that. Yeah, they're
Richard Levine, that bloke who was like had a long career as a medical doctor and was like a father of three and decided that he wanted to cosplay as a woman then. So like, where's the economic prison for those guys? I don't think there is one.
Dylan Mulvaney, he's cashed in on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is his ticket to the Bud Light millions. So this is,
well, he got a letter from Kamala, and he got to go on the talk show circuit. So all these trans maids could worship him and welcome him to the girlhood.
Well, I'm surprised that he wasn't the vice presidential pick.
I know.
They went with a guy instead who signed like a bill into law. Tim Walz, this is when he was governor of Minnesota, that sought to remove the prohibition on pedophilia being identified as a sexuality. That's Governor Walz's record. So I guess
and also he's big. Him and his wife are big on the trans kids thing. They're big on, like, if your kid says they're trans and you won't, and the parents won't support their medicalization and basically sterilization, that the state can get involved and remove the kid from your care because you're transphobic and trying to convert them to, conversion therapy, to basically, which is a lovely way of saying to accept the fact that they're male or female. So he's lovely, and his wife is she's totally she really wants to save the quote unquote trans kids by medicalizing them.
God preserve us all from bored petty bourgeois liberals who want to find a cause for themselves, but I mean, Dave there is a classic example of what academic Marxism has become, which is just stringing together a series of unconnected words and shoving the term dialectics in there
Hmm.
and pretending that you're waging some kind of liberation war. Or in actual fact, Dave's just waging a liberation war inside his own head.
Yeah.
And he's winning as well. He's been liberated from himself.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Let me see. Oh, that I have to get that done. Yeah, and another one was a lot of that I heard is various renditions of trans people exist. And to which we're like, none of us are saying that there aren't people in the world who say they're trans. Yeah, but what we're saying is that the basic like that used to be, common, not a controversial statement till about 10 years ago, is that humans come in two biological categories, male and female, and you can't literally transition from one to the other. And to come up with gender as a way to separate how someone's feelings about what they are versus their body, and then use that as a cudgel, is completely idealistic and in practice totalitarian. Nothing left about it. Well, technically,
Mm.
used to not be. So the idea, like, we're not saying that there aren't lots of people who say I'm trans, or non-binary. What we're saying is that that's totally radically subjective, idealistic, because we can look at somebody and be like, no, you're a man. And if there's any confusion, we could do all kinds of tests if that somehow has become necessary. Now to be like, yeah, this is a male. That's what we're saying, is that you can say you're trans, doesn't change if you're male or female. You can say you're non-binary, doesn't change if you're male or female. You can say that you're a unicorn or a furry or whatever, or that you don't believe in that. It's all fine, but everybody is male or female, no matter what you say, no matter what you do.
Mm.
That's the point. Not that people aren't saying this. People also say all kinds of things. There's people who say that, that they feel like they're Jesus. That's cool. Or that the world
I
is
met a guy
flat.
like that once.
Or, yeah, or the world is flat, or that all kinds of things. So,
Yeah, I knew oh, I didn't know him, but I was got to be familiar with a guy who was a street preacher in Manchester about 10 years ago. And he had a quite profound belief that not only was Christ speaking through him, but he was a manifestation of one of the Holy Trinity.
mhm,
And I'm guessing he was completely sincere in this particular delusion.
yeah,
But the point is, then, okay, so when is the delusion? When is it acceptable to call something like that a delusion? You know, is it
yeah,
is it when enough people who are wealthy invest in things, or invest in certain products,
mhm,
or invest in certain pharmaceutical treatments,
mhm,
that it becomes a money maker? Is that when the delusion becomes something which can be not only accepted but embraced? Because that's
mhm,
what it seems to be with the trans thing. When it got identified as something which could make money for pharmaceutical corporations, at that point, suddenly a lot of money starts going into promoting it.
mhm,
And that, and the other big question that people on the left should ask is like, well, why is it that some teenagers and younger people in particular have become so alienated and embittered that they have suddenly started rejecting or thinking that they can reject the body that they have?
mhm,
Why is that not actually something which is quite concerning?
mm,
That that younger people in particular are that disturbed that some of them feel the need to seek out like surgeries or pharmaceutical intervention. That's something which should be a matter of concern,
mhm,
really. It's like I would put it on the same level as eating disorders or
mhm,
self-harming,
mhm,
really, because it's a manifestation of the same thing. I knew a guy, it must be about 13 years ago now. We were in the same political organization for a while. And every time he'd pull up his sleeve, you would see like razor marks all the way
oh, the
down.
cutting, yeah,
Yeah, all the way down each arm. And I was like, well, why do you do that? And he says, oh, I feel better afterwards. And I'm like,
mm,
oh, okay. So what should we now tell people who like slice themselves up that they are valid and it's a valid expression, or should we try and find out the reason why somebody would do that? Why does somebody feel like
mhm,
in such a psychological bad place that they think that self-mutilation or like suppressing the natural cycles of the body and then but the cycle of natural development is a good thing. Why is that being sold as liberation? Well, we can
Mm,
understand why it's being sold as liberation by, drug companies, because these are deeply cynical actors who are looking at a bottom
mm,
line. But
mm,
like the fact that the left now is so completely divorced from the working class that the only ideology that gets pumped into it is bourgeois ideology. So
mm,
it's literally doing an advertising job for the pharmaceutical companies now.
mm,
And
mm,
again, I shouldn't be surprised at that, because
mm,
they completely discarded their critical faculties over things like the COVID vaccinations, and completely stopped questioning the pharmaceutical companies about that. So I guess it should be no surprise that they're endorsing drugs and drug companies pushed by the likes of
mm,
Warren Buffett and the Pritzker
mm.
family.
Yeah, and just on that, I want to quickly shout out Jennifer Billick. I don't know if she's been following the capitalism of this as well. So the trans, so she calls it Gender Inc. Tech, high tech and capitalism. So again, in addition to the pharmaceutical, big medicine, and also tech, this idea that there's a lot of interest in this kind of transhuman, so we would want to call it cyborgs or whatever.
Hmm.
And her argument is that we need to really stop focusing on pronouns and how many sexes there are. Not that that isn't happening, but to focus on where this is really going is trying to get us used to kind of this disassociation from a further kind of, or we would say alienation from our material being, to be able to do all kinds of interesting things. So what's behind these billionaires and millionaires in these organizations trying to encode a fiction and law of gender identity? you know and it's the idea
Yeah.
that, well, if you're like 10, 15, 20 beyond your program is to have various cyborgs, for lack of whatever, synthetic identities, then of course the people who are going to be on board that want the state to recognize them as having the same rights, if not special rights, as just us regular old models who who don't have anything
Well,
done. And she's put a
I
lot
think
of work into that, just basically focusing on the money. And I just wanted to add that because, of course, big pharma is a part of that, but there's also a consortium which she's calling kind of like the transhuman industry or transhuman capital. You mean like the fourth generation or fourth industrial revolution or dystopian revolution. That they talk about things like when they talk about fertility equity, when they're basically saying that gay men need to have fertility. They talk about fertility equity, so there's no reason why gay men shouldn't be able to have kids. And the idea is that we should be able to technologically figure out the way that you don't only have to rely on the women, the breeders, the surrogates. And I can't imagine it, but I'm not a technological person, that they could ever get to a point where they could totally breed a human without a female involvement.
hmm.
But they're trying to, and they sell this as a civil rights thing, like everybody should be able to have a baby, there's a human right to reproduction. And I'm like, no, there's not a human right that everyone gets to have their own offspring. And they really want it. So it's kind of interesting that, anyway, I don't want to get too far off in the woods there, but just want to highlight Jennifer Billick's book, because she's one of the few people really focusing on the political economy of this, and following the growth market that people are salivating over, investing in these transsexual, transgender, transhuman industries coming, they hope, coming down the pike. And of course, a lot of these things if you're going to do these things to yourselves, it affects your fertility. So of course you have to have options, synthetic, medical, technical fertility enhancement options, if you're going to do things to your body that destroy or weaken your fertility. So these things are very intertwined, and encouraging us to think it's progressive or liberating, not to be contained or imprisoned within our human body. They're trying to sell it as the ultimate liberation, whereas some of us are like, hold on now, this is problematic, I think.
Well,
I just wanted to throw her up there.
the fact that so many rich people have like utterly insane ideas shouldn't be a surprise. And the fact that a lot of this is like popping up now, like even like the very title of of the program here, like Morbid Symptoms Media, you're taking it from the Gramsci quote. Like this is the time
Yeah.
of great change in the world and decline of the West. So like the ruling class go increasingly irrational, and the root of a lot of this is the fact that that there is a crisis which cannot be resolved at the heart of the capitalist system in the United States, Britain, and Western Europe. And then you get ideological manifestations of that all over the place, which revolve around an escape into a fantasy world and trying to design a fantasy world for themselves. So the fantasies go in various different ways. So like there's the fantasies of those who go and buy up a load of real estate in New Zealand and say they're going to wait out the crisis in a bunker, which is insane and won't work. Then you get the fantasy that they can escape the very the earthly realm almost whilst remaining within it, so they can escape the bodily realm. Now this manifests itself through like the transgenderism thing, and also like the crazy idea that like Musk, the con man Musk, is putting out there, like the idea of like, well, ultimately we can download ourselves into a memory chip and have ourselves uploaded into a new body later on. Maybe that'll be a
The
different sex as
metaverse.
well. But this is like the fact that this comes up over and over again, whether it's like gender stuff or whether it's like techno dystopian or utopian, depending upon your point of view stuff. It all comes back to the fact that there's no escape from this very deep crisis of capitalism that the West is in now, and so that various like rich maniacs have decided that they're going to try and fantasize their way out of it, whilst making money out of it as well. Shouldn't be a surprise. It's all just part of this greater crisis. And again, the job of Marxists is to analyze that properly. Whereas like some of the Marxists are just running around screaming, "Hey, let's enjoy the symptoms."
Yeah, and I yeah, that is why when I was trying to figure out what to call this media project, and I'm like, well, I have no name recognition, so if I say it's Tara Van Dyke shows, like people can be like, yeah, whatever. And so I landed on Morbid Symptoms because it was broad enough, because all these things, and that's also why I usually in the promo I have that sign from like the 5 phases of grief. So you have like denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and then finally acceptance. And it's like all this stuff is just like, and that's right. And that's what's so sad, is that it's so crying out for an actual various types of, various strands of Marxist materialist analysis. But what we have is people who should be doing that, celebrating this stuff. And I'm like, how can you miss this? The morbid symptoms aspect of it. How can you miss the capital accumulation aspect of it? I mean, more genders, more money. I mean, hello. And this idea that somehow you can be both radical and countercultural and have the entire establishment waving your flag.
Yeah, quite literally waving your flag in this case.
The CIA, Goldman Sachs, all the major corporations, the Democratic Party, the Labor Party, but also some on the more quote unquote conservative ones who want to kind of liberal Zionist this, like, well, yeah, you have to be whatever. And it's just like, what? But we're the crazy ones. I mean, that's the thing. And here's Pumphrey, and she also in her bio, she's like, I don't know, she has several signifiers, if we will, signifying or signaling that she's, some sort of Marxist-Leninist communist freedom fighter. I don't know. And she told me that my rabid anti-wokeness and practice operates exactly the same as liberal wokeness. Why don't you talk about something that matters? There's that. Something actually bad, like that Tim Waltz is a Zionist. Well, I did. You're not a Marxist. You're just a right-wing culture warrior. Now,
fun stuff.
Yeah, what's up, bruh? And I've had variations of this, and this happened quite a bit with when people were coming at you for just saying, no, that Khalif's a man, and even males with if he has a DSR, still a man, and I can see it. I can see it with my eyes, you know? And but anyway, um and so but people were just like and there was this one woman who was relentless. I was just like, I can't shake this woman, you know? And usually if I say, "Hey, you should come on the show and I want to hear you out," usually then they quiet down a bit. But she was just like and so I finally asked him, like, "Are you in love with him? Are you like the president of Khalif's fan club or something? I mean, really, what's going on here?" She's like, "No, I just like calling out right wing bigots and blah 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 and this and that." And I'm like, "Oh, so me saying that biology is real and that males shouldn't shouldn't be on the women's Olympic boxing team makes me right wing." I'm like, "If that's what you want to say, it's like, whatever." "Well, you sound right wing to me." And then I thought, okay, some of this stuff is just totally the tribal stuff. So if they think, okay, the people who have an issue with this are right wing, blah 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 blah. We're on the other side. We're not, so we have to be for it. So they just have to be for. They have to defend men competing in women's boxing or in women's sports or being in women's prisons or women's crisis centers or getting women fired because they won't, wax their balls or call them by their preferred pronoun or all this stuff. It's like, no, that's, they whatever. No, it's like, this is right. The right's against this, so we're for it. I think some of it's just
Well,
that stupid. But you
yeah,
tell me,
it is.
you had some experience with me now. Do you think I'm a secret or not even so secret? I'm just a right wing culture warrior.
Well, I did notice the Trump picture you took down before the stream started, Tara. And the auto
Ooh,
and the hillbilly elegy copy that you had, signed by J.D. Vance.
it's all
Um,
that's for the
it's
next
all off
episode.
screen, but well, again, like we come back to like we sort of walk. We're all walking around the ruins of a failed revolution in many respects, and the failed
Mm,
revolution is like the attempt by the left to understand why everything fell apart for the organized left in the West after about the 1970s.
mm,
And the reason why they can't understand that is because they can't they look at like this what they see as a period of like high radicalism in the 60s and the 70s, and they don't really understand it very well. And I say that as a criticism, but also because I didn't understand it very well. I mean, I was only born in 82.
mm,
So you have a sort of bastardized view of that period. But they view everything through the sort of the lens and left and right as defined in like the 60s. So like the right is these stodgy white men who play golf and spend all their time like being like cartoonishly racist, and like they want to I don't know, put remove women from the workforce. Well, to be fair, a few do.
yeah.
And like they're still like the right wing of like 1955. That's how
Mm,
like these sort of leftists view things, and they think of themselves as essentially like the civil rights, anti-Vietnam War people, student protesters from Paris, 1968. Now there are some ideological continuations there because people like Daniel Cohn-Bendit and the German Green Party and the French Green Party have a very dodgy past when it comes to, shall we say, crimes of a sexual nature, which we could get into in the future if your audience is interested. But because they see it this way, and they don't see like they just see right wing as a category and an insult. They don't see the
mm,
material basis, which is the right wing changed. The right
mm,
wing changed by the time of Thatcher and Reagan. Like, so they dropped by then to because they needed to appeal to a middle class and a working class
mm,
audience and voting base that was interested in at least the pretense of social mobility. And so in
mm,
Britain, like Thatcher, the big selling point for Margaret Thatcher, one of them was that she was the grocer's daughter. Yeah.
mm,
That she was actually from the lower middle class. She wasn't from the old Tory aristocracy.
mhm,
And that this was somebody who, if you were an ordinary person, that you could relate to. It wasn't Harold Macmillan or Alec Douglas Home. Again, like same with like, oh, I mean, Reagan was an actor, of course, but he
mm,
was marketed as a regular guy. But of course,
mhm,
what capitalism does quite well is that because it's more flexible than aristocracy, than feudal aristocracy, it can bring people from the working class and have them serve capital in a very dedicated and often fanatical way and be very well rewarded for it. So Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton was from a very poor background. Keir
Yeah, Barack
Starmer, as he
Obama
keeps telling
also
you,
was. I mean, not he's pretty middle class, but not not
he
rich.
wasn't rich. He's not
No,
like
no,
from the top of the tree.
no,
And
no.
the thing that the left misses is like the right can be has like shifted to the point where its political representatives can be drawn from the working class and then serve capital. Therefore, like and then also they've given up largely by like the 2000s. They knew that they'd lost the point, that it wasn't worth fighting over gay rights anymore, and it wasn't really worth fighting about, you know, putting women back in the home anymore, because capital makes a lot of money exploiting women workers. Why would they want them to shove women back into the home to do domestic duties again? Ideally,
Yeah,
you want them doing both if you're capital.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
but because the left still has this view of like right wing stuff, like of what the right wing is, they completely miss the point about like what the right and left divide really is now, or what it should have been, which is that if the left is defined as the critical part of society, you're taking, you know, our cue from the old terms from the French Revolution. If the left is the part of society which is dedicated to a push to a more, shall we say, more progressive future, then the form of the left changes, but the form of the right changes. And so,
Oh my
so they're so
God, like a dialectic, Mr. McKay,
almost, yes, because
interlinked. Yeah.
because the two things keep changing due to the class forces involved, but because the left's view of like the 60s and the 70s is almost entirely cultural now. Like the class element's been completely divorced from it. They still see things as like radical hippies versus nasty old white men, you know. And it's only, and not that and they can't get their heads around the idea that you can be a black woman now, admittedly less common than a white man, and be like a ruthless CEO or be on a corporate board and pursue an anti-working class agenda with just as much vigor as any guy who went to Eton, and
Yeah.
be well rewarded for it. Because if you're prepared to play the game and be a dedicated servant of capital, then it doesn't matter. Now it doesn't matter which background you came from. In fact, you'll be celebrated if you're like or if you're from a poorer background, or if your parents were black, or you're mixed race, or you've got some identity characteristic that they can put on the
Rishi
advertising.
Sunak.
Yeah, well, he was from a fairly sort of lower middle class background.
Yeah, his parents ran a pharmacy or something. Yeah.
Yeah, one of his parents ran a pharmacy. I think the other one was a doctor. So like,
Yeah.
fairly comfortably off, but not rich by any means. And then you can become mega rich and become prime minister. And the left is still fighting the last sort of a cultural version of the last war. They haven't updated themselves at all. So they're easily taken in by this idea of like individual liberation, because they're still thinking in terms of like the 1960s, like the battle is for individuals to be given the rights to do certain things. And of course, all those battles were given up on because capital decided, well, we don't really care. It doesn't really matter to us who somebody wants to sleep with. If we're a capitalist, it doesn't really matter to us if somebody wants to get high, as long as they can turn up and do the 9 to 5 every day. And it doesn't really matter to us if somebody wants to drink themselves to oblivion, you know? So you'll be given those freedoms. Yeah. But it'll still be, you know, worked until you're 68 or until death. But you can drink whilst you're doing it in your spare time. And you can have all these supposed personal freedoms outside of it. But because they're still stuck on this idea that that the right is about a defense of cultural conservatism, whereas it's not. The right is fundamentally about a defense of a defense of capital, a defense of private ownership of the means of production. Just as, by the way, the conventional left is now as well, which is another part of that confusion.
No, and I just
sorry,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to conclude with all of this is in the mix as to why they can't understand the why people who are Marxists could reject some of this stuff. Like and why also that even when it comes to stuff like drugs and alcohol and its availability, some of us don't think it's a particularly good idea for the condition of your mind to be off your face all the time. I mean, because like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I've done those things when I was
Yeah,
younger.
me too, brother.
Yeah,
I had my time.
we've all indulged in that. But
My
you
20s were a
do
bit of
reach
a blur. Yeah.
yeah, you do reach a certain point when you start to think, well, not only is this not good in terms of personal health, but like if I'm aiming to actually do something where I'm providing an element of like critical analysis of something, then actually you need a clear head, you know? And actually we shouldn't be encouraging like massive overindulgence of these things because it doesn't lead to healthy outcomes. And you get accused of being a fascist for saying that. You get accused of being a fascist by simply suggesting that, hey, maybe you should go outside every now and again, you know, because like the
Or learn how to
online left
communicate
is,
with the opposite sex.
yes, that would be important. Maybe that's why some of them have started identifying as the opposite sex, because they can then have a conversation with somebody who is identified as being the opposite sex when they're talking to themselves in the mirror, like a sort of a transgender
Online,
Travis Bickle or something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that this is the idea is this that we probably don't have too much time, but we might, there's so much to talk about. But this idea that with intersectionality, that somehow when you have the tripartite gender, race, and class, that we forget or we have forgotten that one of these things is not like the other. Now, you definitely need a class structure to have capitalism. You don't need racism. You don't need sexism. You don't need 5 genders, to have that. Now, it's been used. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to say that that ideas about the difference between men and women, and as well as the actual differences, and then ideas about race haven't been used to justify lower wages or to segment the labor market and various things. But the idea is that you don't have to have racism or sexism or race at all for capitalism to work.
No.
You have to be, so it helps it out. And it's the idea that, like, I'm just kind of saying what you just said in a different way, is that it's fine with the upper class and with capitalists to have parity in the elite. It's fantastic for them to have parity in the elite. So and some people think that's great. Like the idea that Beyonce and Jay-Z are so rich means like all that, like that's great for all Black people. Like somehow they're getting a chunk of that money. Like somehow I'm getting a chunk of the Bill Gates and Elon Musk money or something. It's like, so the idea that if we have parity, so if we have, let's say, whatever, we'll just use the United States as an example. So if we have 20% of the, or 16% of the elites are Black, and maybe 20% are Latino, and 20% are Asian, and 50% are white. And then within that, used to be 50-50 men and women, but now, we have all this other stuff. So who knows? And then we'd be like, oh, fantastic. Look what we did. We solved it. Can't complain. Not racist. Look at our board. Yeah. Not sexist.
There's one
look at our board.
One of
not
every
homophobic.
96 genders on
Look
there.
At our board. We're not transphobic. Look at our board. And then what are you going to say? You're like, oh, cool. So it's just, yeah. And I just like this Voltaire quote. And look at him being all transgender with that wig. We see you.
Yeah.
We see you.
Yeah. Turns out, no, that's stolen valor, Tara.
Yeah.
That white man is appropriating trans culture.
Or was he a man? I don't. Well, do we have any verification of his genitalia?
Well, I'm sure somebody's gonna go off to Paris and check.
I mean, I know, like, how did I mean, I don't. Maybe, yeah. I should say I'm a woman, by the way. I'm assuming you're a man, but I don't want to,
well, assume away.
Yeah. So let's see. Oh, so again, so as we said, and I think some people are trying. You have some people who just don't want to talk about it. It's like, oh, why are you on about this? As if every institution practically accepting and reifying this nonsense is somehow not a concern. As somehow it's just a limited thing. Like, oh, it's just a gender thing. Like somehow it's not, like it's a kind of a cancer that's just like a lump in one place rather that can spread and metastasize. It's like, no, you need to look at this, because look how this traveled. And if you can get people to go along with this, what can you not get people to go along with?
Well, quite a
I
lot, as
mean,
it turns out.
yeah. So anyway, the Nation that is, I don't know if people in the UK are, well, they might be familiar with. The Nation is it's been around a long time in the States, and it's like the left wing, left publication. And they put this out yesterday. Transphobia doesn't just harm trans people, it hurts cisgender women who don't conform to, wait for it, narrow Eurocentric vision of womanhood. We must defend Khalif.
Well, I mean, there was didn't the USA women's team win the rugby sevens tournament? I think I'm correct in saying that. And like there was like some of those women aren't stereotyped visions of womanhood either,
No.
but they were all women. But they like the I think she's the captain of their team was like attacked for or like stigmatized for like not being like, I don't know, like a runway model or something. But like I don't see what this example, like where regardless of like shall we say the technicalities involved, like even the Olympic authorities, and by the way, the Olympics is a completely corrupt organization. Let's just say that straight away.
Yeah.
But like there was the case of, you remember the South African runner Caster Semenya? It must be over 14, 15 years ago now.
Who's fathered two children, by the way. Anyway, just want to throw that in there.
Congratulations to him. Like there were exactly.
It's a transgender miracle.
It's a miracle. Someone with male genitalia had children, or was able to father children. But again, like this should be fairly easy to resolve. This question of whether somebody's a man or a woman. It's only like because of like you are now like it's been buried in layers of ideology that like the organizers are proclaiming, oh, we just don't know. We just don't know. It was like we just got to go with whatever somebody says. Like, yeah, it's like no, you can tell. You can test for these things. It's fairly straightforward.
Cheek swab,
in actual fact.
This guy and he failed it twice. This guy failed it twice. That's why the IBA won't let him compete against women, because he's failed two of those in the past. Anyway, go ahead.
Again, like it should be easy to resolve if you actually had any rationality left in the system, but it doesn't, and so it becomes like this wild piece of bullshit that like the Nation, of course, defends it, but then again, the Nation, I think, is not the magazine that it was back in like the 1930s when it was backing like labor struggles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
These days, I think it's mainly exists to sort of say how great Kamala Harris is, and how everybody should vote for the Democrats. Just ignore the genocide. So
not
again,
Trump, not Trump. Yeah.
Yeah, just as long as the genocide's being presented by what is Kamala this week? She's African American this week. To quote Trump,
yes.
As long as it's being presented properly and the right language cues are used, as long as she says
she feels
things
bad
like,
for those kids being killed, and
we'll
still send the weapons, but feels bad about it.
Yeah, tomorrow is today's yesterday. Tomorrow, and who knows what gender we will be yesterday. We're burdened by what was. We're just burdened by what was. We're unburdened by what is in the name of what could be, what could have been. And
got it?
By the way, do you understand? By the way, Kamala is drunk by 10 a.m.
Yeah, but I love this is like who don't conform to a narrow Eurocentric vision of women. That women are female, is that the narrow? And the idea that this is a Eurocentric invention, that women are female.
Again, though, like it's just.
But this got through. I mean, this got through.
Of course it did.
Just like someone like,
because all you've got to do is to hit certain
people
buzzwords.
Who will say this.
Yeah, but you've just got to hit certain buzzwords, Tara, haven't you? As long as in the writing you say transphobia, you say Eurocentric, and you can throw in decolonization, but not in reference to Israel. Then
Or in reference to
you can get,
capitalism.
or you can talk about capitalism, but as long as you're not making any serious references to class, then you can say anything you like. You can say any kind of nonsense as long as you're sticking all those words together, because that's useful for the ruling class, because then they can say, hey, look what communism is. It's these weirdos sticking long sentences together which nobody understands to justify complete bullshit.
And not to be outdone, Professor, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, probably not. Professor Stephen Whittle, OBE, PhD, D-Law, Faculty of Social Science, I guess. And I'll
Well,
just assume
that's a lot of impressive
yeah,
titles.
yes, and I'll just assume that he's not making that up. But he likes to give it to the ladies who like to say that women aren't men. And so today he's after Maya Forstarter from Sex Matters, who was kind of witch hunted out of her job at ODID, Overseas Development Institute, for not going along with that men are women if they say so. And she eventually won her lawsuit. And now we have the idea that it's an okay belief. It's okay for you to believe that men aren't women and women aren't men. It's okay to believe that.
So
But
it's
he's
also
been after
okay to
her.
believe that rain is wet.
Yes. And anyway, so he's like, Maya, please do tell us how you know more about Khalif's body than the IOC and possibly Khalif herself. Or have you once again judged a woman by the standards of beauty imposed by a white European American patriarchy?
But he's got all the words. Hang on, isn't he a white European man?
Sorry?
And also, like, isn't Professor Stephen Whittle, judging by his profile picture there,
Yeah.
isn't he like a white European man?
He is.
Yeah. So it always seems to be them.
It's okay
that
for
are the
him to
most
judge
obsessed with
Maya.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay for him.
Who are you,
Because
woman,
he's
to say?
enlightened. Yeah. Who are you to say it? I can, because I'm OBE, PhD, D-Laws, and fascist. Sorry, facts.
I'm always concerned. I'm always right away when I see that, and that's why I don't put any of my bullshit. Well, not, I mean, I did work hard for my whatever, my degrees or whatever, but it's why I don't put any of it in my title, in my bio, because when I see this, I just am immediately like, dude. First of all, I'm like,
Yeah,
is it
what?
true? And but sometimes I want to mock it. Like I want to put like, Tara Van Dyke, BSc, MS, MRes, PhD, postdoc, a swim meet champion, just like have everything.
Well, I could put my Boy Scout shooting badge on there.
Believe me when I tell you things. Look at me. It's like, it's
Yes.
so hilarious. And it's sad. If he is a professor, God help his students. That's all I
Well,
have to say.
you'll probably find out that he's like been retired, or he's resigned in disgrace or something.
Who knows?
If you're putting all the titles in there on the bio, then you're clearly overcompensating for something.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, it's just, but yeah. Okay, so let's see. It goes on. Yeah. Oh, here was another great one. Natasha Leonard from The Intercept, which was supposed to be, I think Glenn Greenwald at some point, and I think it was Greenwald, TB, and Jeremy Scahill was some billionaire backer. We're going to do real journalism.
Yeah, Scahill and Greenwald, of course. Greenwald left a long time ago. Scahill's gone now. So now it's apparently like basically a sort of a Pentagon approved alternative media site. So it went from being critical to being something which is like on the inside of the tent.
Well, Natasha Leonard is one of their investigative journalists. And
what's she investigating here?
Well, her title is The Right-Wing Campaign to Purge Women from Women's Sports. Algerian boxer Amin Khalif is the latest athlete deemed insufficiently female by extremists obsessed with the strictest of gender binaries. That being that men aren't women.
Because like,
this came out like 2 days ago.
These are the same people who have been supporting like what's the name of that guy who like that shameless fat bloke who like won loads of like women's cycling races.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
a-
yeah. I
and
know, I know who you're talking. I don't know his name, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah, cycling
and
was
like
really
the
was the first target of this for some reason.
Yeah, and
Cycling
then there
and
was the
skateboarding,
guy, there
surfing.
was the
Yeah,
New Zealander who the failed weightlifting guy who
yeah,
ended up they identified as a woman, only came fourth in the end in I think it was the Commonwealth Games,
yeah.
and then there's various very dubious men trying to compete as women in basketball,
Mm,
and there's a whole range of things
yeah.
where like the left supported all of that. So like they have to
And still
turn around and
does.
have this, and still
She would say
does.
she's probably a Bernie crowd or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah.
Presumably, she means she contributes to Bernie's pension fund.
But I want to know
Um,
what kind of investigation she did before she pumped out this fantastic think piece.
well, the great thing about this is you don't have to do any. You know, you can write this. You could almost like run this through like a Chat GPT to produce this,
Mm,
and like still be paid whatever large amount of money that the Intercept pays like its big
mm,
names. So like
mm,
again, like once you've cracked open this, you can just basically churn out any old crap, and as long as you got the buzzwords in there, then someone will go some New York Times aspirant, or some like middle class person in
mm.
London or something will nod and go, oh yes, yes, this reading this makes me feel like I'm on the right side of something, which is really all it's about.
Yeah. Well, I loved how like the latest athlete deemed insufficiently female. It's yeah, it's like I'm sorry, I'm gonna try not to curse. It's like, yeah, he's male. You don't get more insufficiently female than being a male. My God.
Yeah, that is pretty much the qualifier, isn't it? You know?
It's like it's, oh my God. So Kev Max said at least believers in capitalism and Marxists can agree on this. Yeah, on gender ideology.
Well, some,
Some, yeah.
some.
Believers, yeah,
Not
yeah.
by no
I'm
means
a
all.
believer. Apparently, I've been told like you're a terrible Marxist, and then I would and yeah, I'll get to that later when I actually did that. I was like, um, uh, yeah, and then people because if you push them, eventually they will sometimes reveal that they have no idea what they're talking about. Like I shared with you that guy who was saying, "Well, gender's a social construct or sex or whatever," and I said something, and he's like, "Okay, well, what is it?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna regret asking you this, but what is a social construct?" It's like, dude, you're the one using that term, but just no
Yeah.
idea. Just no idea. Oh, well, if Marxism isn't about this, then what is it about? And I'm like, it's the science and politics of overcoming the primary contradiction of bourgeois society, namely labor capital.
Hmm. It's the campaign for the abolition of the. It's
It's not
the.
about
It's
freeing
the.
men from
It's not. It's
having
not
to.
about redefining what a man and a woman is. I mean, the other point, and I've got to knock off in just a moment, Tara. But
Okay.
I wanted just to mention that the they're one of the things they routinely do. These guys, and it is usually guys doing this, is like they bastardize various aspects of Marxism. And like I saw somebody doing this. I think it was in response to either yourself or somebody else. The one from one of the clips you put out, um, where they were saying that, well, Engels in Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State says that we will overcome the family. And so I went and checked the actual quote, because I just finished doing a reread of it, and so I found the quote, and it says, because it's an anthropological book looking at the evolution of the organization of family through the ages, and like how that's been linked to changes in the material base of society. And so the actual page deals with the fact that you go from, and depending upon economic organization, from ancient societies based on matriarchal relations or a matriarchal society, then it goes to a patriarchal society. Then we get the into the modern era, and you get the sort of invention of the evolution towards what's defined as the nuclear family. And
Mm,
Engels' point is, when the mode of production changes, the nature of family will probably change again. But the key, there's two key things there. First of all, when the mode of production changes, then there will be a further evolution. But second of all, bear in mind the point that he keeps coming back to in that book, which is like that ancient communal forms of society will probably be, and sort of natural forms of living, will come back in a higher form when we reach a higher level of mode of production. So yes, new human relations will emerge, but it doesn't like neither matriarchal nor patriarchal societies redefined what men and women were. You know, their roles changed in the family. The way the families were set up were changed. And if you look at actually existing socialist societies, what actually happened was that women were freed from the need to like provide, to be like a primary carer and a worker for like their children or their relatives, because these things were like provided on a community or state-run basis by people who could be trusted, often within the community. And so women were not only free to not have like their job progression weren't getting their job progression interrupted anymore, but were able to live more freely and dispose of unwanted, or should we say, like partners who they'd reached the end of the road with, without legal sanction or economic consequences, or negative economic consequences. And so if we can look at the socialist experiments of the 20th and 21st centuries, some of which succeeded, some of which failed, but where you look at like the role of the position of the family, what happens is you have an evolution towards what you might call serial monogamy, which is like where like women and men go through different partners at different stages of life, and that this is accepted as a natural thing to go through. There's no longer any penalties associated with it. And so that's an evolution. That doesn't say that a woman is no longer a woman and a man can become one by just saying that he is, or tweeting about it, or putting it in his bio. That's an evolution depending upon a different mode of production. It's not Engels said that the fantasies inside some deranged man's head become a reality because he tweets really hard about it and believes really hard.
Yeah.
Like to look at that and think that you can that in any way justifies any of the crap that these people come out with. Well, you've got to have had a severe brain injury or have not actually read the book. And I'm convinced that for a lot of these people, they see a tiny quote and think that'll do. I'll use that. And it's a complete bastardization. It shows that they're not serious people.
And I also want to show that just really quickly. I know you have to go, but I hope I can keep you for like 5 more minutes. Is that possible? Yep. Okay. I'll try to be quick. You're like a unicorn. Okay. Anyway, thank you for giving me your time. I know you're busy. Okay. So, but here's the other thing is that people will glom on to all of this. We don't know anything about what Khalif says. All I know, based on the pictures, it's quite clear he's not living as an Algerian woman, because an Algerian woman would not practice out in the open in public dressed like this in Algeria or other places.
I thought that this guy was signing for a Premier League team, judging from this photo.
So big sister, so I say big sister again instead of big brother, but big sister in quotes, says he's an Algerian woman. And someone was also, and I'm saying, and then somebody got, tried to piffy. They're trying to and I'm like, here's my favorite one. I'm not going to get into the rumors about Macron's wife, but here's this picture and he's meeting Macron. And I'm like, big sister, woke bros and trans maids tell you he's a woman, but Macron's eyes say otherwise.
I think Macron's found his new wife.
Yeah. And I'm just like, also an Algerian woman who's single is not going to be out and about hobnobbing with other men with no chaperone or no other people. I mean, it's just like, please. And now people are trying to say that he's some sort of, this person. A main Khalif is a true woman gifted by God with unique traits. Yeah, I'd say testicles. Instead of focusing on her natural differences, that she's a man, let's address the real concerns of wait for this, the LGBTQ agenda. Now and these same people will get mad at feminists, and not just feminists, just anybody who says he's a man. Oh, you're gonna cause Khalif trouble in Algeria. It's a conservative society. Do you think making him the face case of LGBTQ is helping his safety in Algeria?
Probably not.
And they're projecting all of this onto him. They're projecting all of this onto him. I
Well,
have no
because the
idea.
individual
And if
concern doesn't
anything,
matter, does it?
in their parlance, if anything, he would be quote unquote a trans man because he was born
Hmm.
female, but he doesn't present female. He certainly doesn't hit like one. But again, it doesn't matter. Like you said, they just can, whatever they want to say. And I'm just like, whatever. So like, look at this. So I'm like, and this is also with the money part of it. Is it seems there are coaches who actively recruit men with these DSDs to
Hmm.
compete in women's sports. I wonder why they do that. Is it
Well,
because they
cash.
win? Yeah.
Hmm. Well,
Look at
why
all these
were what was
females.
his?
Look at all. And aren't we bad? We're just imposing our Western
Well,
narrow
it's not.
frame
I
of what
mean,
a woman is on these clearly top elite female athletes.
what was the guy's name? William Thomas, who
Oh
presented
yeah,
as
yeah.
Leah Thomas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. I have let's see. I used him for the oh yeah, for this one.
Yeah. Well,
Look at that lady.
that's the exact yeah. Look, but the fact that like some coach approved that because the
Yeah.
coach was thinking, well, if I just let this crazy guy identify as a woman, we'll win more. And
Yeah.
like, given that the IOC and all the sporting bodies are completely and utterly corrupt and completely and utterly dominated by like money interests, then
Mm.
why would they not approve of things like that? Like, why would they not? Why would they not engage in all kinds of corrupt practices? Like they do it for everything else. They're run by oh, that whole doping regime thing. It reveals a certain truth, which is that like you're free to take all kinds of performance enhancing drugs as long as you're on a Western team and you can define it as asthma medication. So why
Mm.
not like shove somebody who has, should we say, certain innate advantages into a woman's category? Why wouldn't you
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
Like
Who cares about
you
women?
think that these well they don't. I mean they don't
No.
care about anything except for the product and the money. And that's really
Hmm.
what it's all about. It's not about liberation for anybody. It's
Hmm.
about like making money, making product, and making sure that this absurd circus stays on the road,
Yeah.
which it's probably
Yeah.
not going to for much longer.
And so Molly thinks she got us. She's like the funniest. So Hazel Appleyard wrote, "This is who the Olympics are trying to convince you as a woman." And Molly, somebody or other, reposted it. The funniest part to me of this is that if she actually identified as a man, the same people would be insisting she was a woman. And I'm like, he both identifies as a man and is one. Algerian women don't dress like this in public, athlete or not. You absolute moron. These people don't know what the frick they're talking about.
Well,
It's
I
like.
think again, like again, what's the old line like from Mao? No investigation, no right to speak. So like
Yeah.
but they don't investigate anything. It's all because all
Mm.
the online thing is like the you're in the take economy, and so
Mhm.
like it's like must get a take in quick. Doesn't matter if
Mm.
it doesn't make any
Mm.
sense. I
Mm.
got to get something in there, you know.
Yeah, and to me, and Sal Grover put this out is that I think women being forced to apologize to men for being punched by them is the logical conclusion of gender ideology. So this poor woman, she loses her opportunity. She has to She has to forfeit because she said she'd never been hit that hard before. She agreed to go to the Olympics to fight against women, not fight against men. And then she gets put out there to make some sort of apology because of poor Khalif and how she didn't mean for, and she doesn't want him, doesn't want she or whatever she had to call him to be put upon. I'm like, oh yeah. So she gets punched in the face, loses her opportunity, but she has to apologize for it.
Hey, well, welcome to welcome to the modern world. You know.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I just want to before you take off, oh crap, Daniel Tutt chimed in.
Hey, he's back, and appropriately, he's got a clown graphic on him.
Yeah, I added that.
Oh, that would have been even more special if that was on his sleeve.
So I didn't know if he would or not, but I thought because I know that tagging people in is kind of snarky, but I thought, well, I'm gonna because he's such the quintessential woke bro on the Marxist left. that I wanted to tag him in here. And so he did respond. He basically just said something like, well, I've never been called a legal Marxist before, but I'm certainly not going to, like justify or count as any transphobia. And that's what he left it at. So we're transphobes, and he was,
Well,
whatever.
I'm sure
And I
that
guess I was,
Daniel's Vanguard Party of One is doing very well.
And I thought it was kind of funny. It's like, well, if it was really BS, you wouldn't have mentioned it at all, because it's kind of funny because it gave me a chance to say something, and a couple of other people, some of the morbid symptoms behind the scenes people to say something, So it was like, well, whatever. And it's like, and also he retweeted it, so it's like, well, thanks for the boost.
Well, he's got to prove that he's on the right side constantly, or he might lose some opportunities,
Yeah. So there's just some more people who are still telling us, calling this guy a she, and don't be transphobic. But I just wanted to end with I guess if I can, very quickly, just a couple of minutes, because we didn't have a chance to talk about too much about how we undo this. How do we because I think a lot of people are just thinking if they just bury their head in the sand and look the other way, that it's gonna burn itself out. This fever will break, and they won't have to go through the pronoun ritual anymore, or have to deal with this stuff. I'm not so sure. Again, I think it's a red flag that this happened. Again, if you will believe and go along with this, despite all evidence to the contrary, that doesn't say a very good thing about your organization in terms of or that you would let what kind of commitment do you have either to the tradition or to the project if you let this stuff fester. And it's only gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. It's been like 12 years now. I haven't seen it. But again, at some point we're thinking it's going to die down. But anyway, I was in London the other night. I was having dinner with some comrades. Someone invited me over internet, saying, hey, I'm in town for a while. I want to meet some people. So anyway, long story short, there's about 5 of us. And first there was 4 of us, or no, 3 of us. And we were all kind of on the same page with this gender idea. It's like, this is just, this is crazy. And it's just, talking about just basically on the same page as you and I are. And then another person comes in, fine. And then the last person comes in, and it's a popular popular podcaster in the States. I'm not going to say who it is, but I knew right away. I thought, oh God, I said to myself, don't bring up anything to do with gender, because she's a totally gender, but total trans maid, total trans women or women, love Dylan Murphy, whatever. And I just thought to myself, I'm not gonna say anything. But unfortunately, an hour or so into it, oh, Alexander's fading. Are you still here, or did you have to leave? Okay, I don't know. I will add him back to the stage. He's gone now, and we'll see if he comes back. Yeah, so I was having and so this person came in who has a quite a popular podcast in the States, 2 of them actually. And I wasn't going to bring this up because I thought, I'm not going to lay a turd in the punch bowl in the middle of a dinner that was primarily about Palestine and not about this. But halfway through the dinner, she brings up George Galloway and the Workers' Party, and why is he so against trans and trans this and trans that? And so then I just kind of, I couldn't take, and I just I started having a conversation, basically, well, because men are women, men aren't women, and women aren't men, and this gender ideology is very divisive and insidious. And so why should the Workers' Party of Great Britain have any concern about this? And to fast forward a bit, she started in with, well, but I don't agree with about the women's spaces being only for cis women, because we know that trans women in prisons are, again, like, very vulnerable to being, sexually assaulted and all this. And I go, well, I have no doubt that could be true, that men who identify as women in prison are going to be more likely to be sexually assaulted, but they're still men, and they don't belong in women's prisons. And she just was not gonna budge on this. She was just, everything we talked about, she would bring up, and I would keep on saying, yeah, but they're not actually women. But they're not actually women. And this person was not having any of it. Would center trans women, so men, and everything. So it was just really bizarre, even to the point that no, of course trans women should be in women's prisons, and of course trans women should be allowed into the women's bathroom because it's safer for them there. And I'm just like, but they're not women. So I don't know if she has a brother who used to be, if she has a sister who used to be a brother. I mean, I don't know, because in every other way, she's lovely. She's fantastic. She considers herself a socialist, very smart. But on the gender issue, it was like dealing with a Stepford wife or something. It was just, no, trans women are women, and they need to be protected. And all of it, like, what is it to you? How does it affect you? And I'm thinking, well, I'm a human and a woman, so it affects me. It's a lie, so it affects me. It's denigrating, so it affects me. It actually does harm to women, as we're seeing with the boxing. And when not that this is the latest example. And I was like, well, and so when I brought up the boxing thing as an example, then somebody else chimed in, the person who got there before her. And it was like, well, she says she's a woman, and Algeria says she's a woman. I'm like, Khalifa's a man. Well, she says, I go, well, she can say anything she wants. I don't know what she's saying. She can say, of course, and Algeria can say what they want, but they put this guy on the women's boxing team. And I'm sure they don't want to be embarrassed by admitting like, oh, well, we got caught. We were trying to cheat or whatever. And I kept on saying, no. I go, well, I don't need a test to tell me that Khalifa's a man. That's just obvious. You look at some the performance and also like the training videos of that his coach has released of him. But the IBA, the National Boxing Association, has said that that Khalif and another boxer who the Olympics is allowed to compete against women have failed to the cheek swab test. Basically, it's like the sex test. Yeah, they failed that, and they also had an examination that was like, yeah, no, they're male. So whether or not they have a DSD, which is a sexual disorder of sexual development, which are also male or female specific. Males have certain DSDs and females have certain DSDs. But regardless of the fact, it's a male, regardless of if he had ambiguous genitalia when he was born, went through male puberty, all that stuff, but it's a man. But no, it's like, no, but she says, I'm like, I don't care what she says. He's, and this came around, and it was just, and eventually, though, the person who was saying that no, Khalif says she's a woman and all that stuff, we were talking afterwards, and he let it be known that he was just, I don't know if he was trying to be polite or just kind of going along, but that he wasn't like committed, like a committed ideologue on this. But the lady podcaster, who I knew as soon as I saw her who she was the most, to deal with a totally GenderBorged trans made face to face. That's why I think that I used to think that most people, the vast majority of people, don't really believe this, but they're going along because it's easier to, or because they think it's nice, or they think that all men who say they're trans are effeminate gay men, which is not true. There's a lot of guys who say they're trans who are heterosexuals. That's another story. But I just kept on saying like, well, but they're not men or they're not women. So what's the point here? Because she didn't want to talk about that. She wanted to make it about safety and inclusion. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not men. They're not women. Sorry. Women aren't a hormone level. We're not men with DSDs. We're not men who think they're women. We're not men who cut their dicks off. We're not men who are imperfect. Women aren't imperfect men. It's just the most craziest stuff ever. But it really made me think that it's going to be really difficult, or maybe more difficult, because it's one thing with the people who are going along with this because it's easier to, because they don't want to be called names, or they just want to focus on their other issues, and they don't want to alienate potential allies or comrades, or they don't want to get in trouble if they're a university teacher or something like that. But there are a lot of people who really, I mean, she seemed like she was groomed. I mean, who really have drank the Kool-Aid on this, will swear up and down that gender is real, just as real as sex, and that if somebody's that you can have male women and female men. And I was just like, okay, but had eventually I dropped it because I was like, this is, I could see the people around the table weren't too interested, weren't too comfortable with it. And again, the issue that brought these people together was Palestine, so I didn't want to harp on it too much. But it was really amazing because the people who I knew were on my side were loath really to say much or to say things directly because they didn't want to upset this person or to get a bad reputation for being a transphobe or something. So the people who were who would be in agreement with me were trying to be like, there's both sides. Like, well, we gotta hear each other out. There's this side and there's that side. And at least that's how it was for me. I'm not on these people's minds, but the idea that if we continue to act like someone who says trans women are women is the same type of claim or is legitimate claim to make, then we're not going to get out of this mess. We have to be able to tell the truth about these basic things because it does matter. It's not innocent, it's not harmless, and it's not nice to lie about something so foundational as sex. And in many places in the world, or at least where I live, yeah, oftentimes the fact that I'm a woman is an issue. But when it is an issue, it really is an issue. And so to pretend otherwise, we're not doing ourselves any favor. And it plays right into the bourgeois edifice. And it's fantastic for pharmaceutical companies and tech companies and rich guys who think that it's not fair that only females get to be women. And we'll talk about sexual apartheid, and that think that that we have to free the reproduction of the species from sexual reproduction, so that there's fertility equity or reproductive equity, which is just like whatever. They make it sound nice, they make it sound progressive, but it's crazy. So Alex never came back. Maybe he really had to leave, like literally had to leave, or his thing went out. I won't take it personally. Let's see, did I miss anybody's comments? Zuleika said sports coaches are dodgy. They dope their own athletes. So of course this is the next step. Yeah. Hugh, Tara, you're just jealous. These men, women are being true to an inner self. So deal with it. Yeah. Nothing's more authentic than pretending to be something that you're not. And then, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, and you got a lot of that. The people who are upset with the clips from Alexander and I's last episode were just like, but they say and they feel. I go, yeah, people can feel and say all kinds of things. Doesn't mean you're right. I mean, I could imagine all kinds of scenarios. Doesn't mean it's right. And the thing that I also think that with language, what we forget about with language is that language is fantastic, but it's also a double-edged sword. Language deceives. We can deceive ourselves and others with language. And so much of this gender stuff is a language game. It's so much of it through. First, they separated sex. They said, no, sex and gender are two separate things. Rather than gender used to be a synonym for sex, for people who didn't want to say sex. Because obviously, you have sex as a male and female, and you also have sex as in having sex. So they want to change that. But somehow to detach this and be like, your gender and your sex are two different things. And that the gender idea that you have in your head somehow takes precedence over your material body is batshit crazy. But somehow that got through. The cis trans thing is also, these people who don't like binaries make up fake binaries all the time. Also, the binary between non-binary and binary, but whatever. But the idea that, okay, well, we'll have two types of women. So we're going to make women a two-category thing. So females and then males who identify as women, and make these the same or equitable. And then, but what it does is it puts, as the deconstructionists will know, what they don't like, but they're fine to do it when it serves their purpose. As whenever you have a binary, you have one that's dominant, one that's subordinate. Well, what's the dominant part of the the cis trans binary, the gender ideologues will say, well, it's the cis. The cis are the dominant, and it's the trans that it's oppressed or suppressed, and magically makes men who say they identify as women oppressed when women say, okay, but no, not, you don't get to go to the bathroom with us or change your clothes with us or make us call ourselves cervix havers or birthers or anything like that, you know, then all of a sudden we're transphobes and we're, you know, we're sexual apartheidists, and we're trying to keep men from migrating into our sex class and all kinds of crazy talk. Let's see what Hugh has to say. Let's see. Hugh, they will reference a group or agency built specifically to support these lies as proof that the lie is true. This is true. Yeah. So it's self-referential. So be like, well, look what so-and-so said, or look what Stonewall said, or look what Judith Butler said. And it's like, well, yeah, they're saying things. People can say all kinds of things. What I'm saying, or what we're saying, is that it doesn't matter what you say. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter what you cut off your body, what you put into your body, or put or add to it, you'll still be male or female. You can't cut or pharmaceutical or drug or language game your way out of that true reality. And to tell people who really want to do this for whatever reason, that they can, is cruel. I mean, it's profitable, but it's cruel. It makes people virtue signal, but it's cruel to the people who actually are, you know, take this, who actually think that, oh, if I suppress my hormones and take the opposite hormone, if I do this or that, if I change my pronouns, if I get people to treat me as a woman, that somehow magically and that's the reason why it's also not why it's not a regular it's a mistake called a civil rights, because there's no other group that claim the right to be recognized as part of a group they weren't part of. Yeah. So we're talking about a group who says, okay, we want the same citizenship rights because we're citizens, we're in the country. That's different than saying, no, that when there was civil rights, it meant that black people wanted to identify as white people and white people wanted to identify as black people. Like, no. So this idea that somebody has a right to be recognized as something that they fundamentally are not is new territory. Let's see. Don't forget Epstein. Building on Zuleika's comments, sports coaches are eyeing up males with DSDs in the poorest countries to exploit in women's sports. Yeah, I don't have any data on that. I've heard this before, and if you look at the countries whose sports teams tend to have most males on them, or people who seem very likely to be male, it does seem that there's and it makes sense that if you can find men who you can pass off as women, that they're 9 times out of 10 going to win, and that's good for your medal count. It's good for your if you're a coach, it's good for your team and this type of thing. So I would not I don't know, right now it's anecdotal because we can see like the people who are I have that picture, but this is not. I don't have. Someone I'm sure is compiling all the pictures of males who have competed in women's competitive sports. But I don't have that. But it certainly seems. Here's the one. But this is these two pictures are of Khalif, and the bottom one is a picture. I don't know if it's from this Olympics or the last one, where 3 men, males, won in Olympic running events. So, and I think the one in the middle was the one that was I think it's the one that where this kind of started off with saying that no, she's that it was a female with a disorder of sexual development, when actually it turns out that is a male with one of those conditions, which clearly has helped him with his performance. Let's see. Johnny Northman. Gender ideology came full force out of nowhere overnight and was fully embraced and pushed by every institution, all corporations, governments, schools, unions, etc., and at the same time, legal and social mechanisms to punish anyone who questions it. Yeah, there's people who are. It's again once. obviously, I think what we should remember is that it seems to us like it came out of nowhere. But now I think if the people who are going back to kind of figure out how we got here can trace it out, it can maybe one of the, I think, early canaries in the coal mine was the switch from women's studies to gender studies. And there's a lot of things that went in, but yeah, once it's kind of like what we call peaked, or once you kind of start noticing this and you start thinking like, why am I seeing preferred pronouns everywhere? Why am I being asked to pretend that this guy is a woman, or this woman is a man, and why all of us, like it did seem like it came like it crescendoed at one point. There certainly was a peak to it, and that's why a lot of us who have been trying to combat this are having it's really difficult because it was so ensconced. And also, there was kind of like a media black, at least in the mainstream media, for the longest time. That there was just no, like you mentioned, everyone was on the same page. It was like, okay, we're doing this now. Like it was very Big Brother. Like all of a sudden, no, trans women are women, and we have preferred pronouns, and sex is a social construct, or if it's not, gender, which is something you can't measure or verify, some feeling in somebody's head, we're going to let that decide who institutions and the state recognizes male or female. Batshit crazy. But yeah, there's people who are trying to piece it together. What was going on before? Like for the iceberg metaphor, what was going on before, all of a sudden we look around, we feel like, why is everybody pretending like this is normal, or why is this the new normal when it seems just really bizarre? I mean, it's one thing to be like, okay, if there's people who for whatever reason want to pretend or to present as the opposite sex for whatever reason, if you're going to decide, okay, as a liberal society, as a democratic society, or a social society, or whatever, you can be like, okay, how are we going to work that out? That's one question. But all of a sudden, and this is what seemed quite overnight, and I'm sure it probably wasn't, but it seemed that way, is that to question that, it wasn't just that they feel like they should be, that they're a man who feels like they should be a woman, or when it feels like should be a man, but they literally are. There was no metaphor anymore, or no just kind of like a fiction to try to explain to themselves how they feel, or explain to us how they feel. All of a sudden it was like, no, they are. If you feel like you're a man, then you're a man, and if you feel like you're a woman, you're a woman. And it was just, and then those of us who were like, what? Then it was amazing, like, you're a fascist, you're a homophobe, you're all kinds of things, just for saying the basic, what's obvious was crazy. So we'll see who yeah. So, and that's where I think Alexander mentioned this, and Jennifer Billick mentions it, some other people. If there wasn't money behind it, if there wasn't money and power behind this is not just about some small 0.1% of the population that feels bad about their biological body. There's other things going on here. Let's see. Joy Northman, how did all these corporations, college unions, all of us, the government, learn, adopt to accept the language and talking points overnight? Again, it seems to us like it was overnight, but I think if we would go back, we would find out that it was probably trickled out. Because as I remember this, again, because once I started to pick up, once I was cued into this, and I would start trying to look back, try to think like, when was the first time I saw something about pronouns? When was the first time I was asked by HR to, like, don't forget to put your pronouns in your bio because we're about inclusion and diversity and all that? I think you have to look at DEI. And when you come up with an organization, then of course they have to justify their existence. They have to come up with different things to include. They have to push diversity and inclusion until it becomes its opposite. Yeah, there's the organizations that transferred from being focused on gay rights and advocacy to trans rights, and then they added all the other stuff, right? So there's trans, non-binary, they add intersex for some reason, which is not a sexuality or a gender identity, but they're trying to make it one. Not that people with intersex conditions don't have sexualities, but they're all either male or female. They're not a third sex or a fourth sex or no sex or both sexes. That's a misnomer. So there's that. So they wanted to, slay another dragon. That dragon was transphobia. There's the AGPs with autogynephile men and powerful places. Would be Jennifer Pritzker, who's a guy, Martin Rothblatt, who's a guy. There's a couple of others who are billionaires who sit atop of pharmaceutical companies or tech companies or the convergence of those, who really think that we should be freed from our bodies, that our bodies are also a kind of prison, that we should free ourselves from biological limitations. And why should woman be only for females? Literally, Martin Rothblatt wrote that. Sexual apartheid. Why should females only get to be women? And there's attorneys and whatnot who, from the early 90s, were trying to figure out a way to start pushing this in law to get this thing called gender identity to be, legally codified. And then, so how their desires fit into their monetary and financial desires. Because, of course, if you're going to push these kind of synthetic identities or these various genders, then your customers aren't going to be very happy unless they can be convinced that the state and other institutions will recognize them as I don't know, superhuman. I don't know what they are. But if every institution will treat a man like a woman, what won't they do? I mean, we have to think about that. Let's see. But again, there's several people who've started to work on this. It's hard because it's hard to get it out. Redux magazine, Genevieve Gluck has focused a lot on the porn and the fetish side of this, the autogynephilia, the fetish, the paraphilias, sissy porn, how this is also as a side note. And I'm resentful that I know all this. I just want to take a moment. I'm resentful that I know all this stuff because I really didn't want to. I really didn't want to know all this stuff. My background is in economic, is like a Marxist economic and urban geographer. It's not on intersex conditions or male paraphilias or also gender body dysmorphic disorders and all this stuff. But anyway, Genevieve Gluck, and I'll put the references in the video notes later on. But Genevieve Gluck from Redux magazine, they're doing the if you're religious, the Lord's work, because there's these poor people, well, brave women who go into the dregs of like Reddit and chat sites and porn that are popular with people who say they're trans, especially men who say they're trans, particularly with men who say they're trans. And report back to us what kind of fantastic things are being associated with women. Jennifer Billick has traced a lot. She's how I know about the Pritzkers and Rothblatt and the what she calls the LGBTQ kind of like racket or thing who've been pushing this. A lot of big players are gay men or AGP men who are in big, powerful places with lots of money and at tech companies and pharmaceutical companies. And they know the Obamas and the Kamalas and the Bidens and all that. Peggy Pritzker, which is Jennifer Pritzker, who's a man's brother, and Pritzker, who's the governor. I can't remember his name, but there's Pritzker, who's the governor of Chicago, or the mayor. Anyway, the state one. She's her family, the Pritzkers, are credited with Obama's political fortunes, going from a first term, or going from a state senator to a first term U.S. senator to president. And the Pritzkers have been pushing gender ID and gender care and trans kids' health and all this stuff. They've been pushing this for a long time. And it's not because they don't have financial interests. They do, because it's a pharmaceutical and technical company. They own one of the companies they own. But also Peggy Pritzker, who's I think in his 60s, late 50s or 60s, decided that he was going to be the woman he always was after being married for like 30 years and having like 3 or 4 kids. And now he's Jennifer Pritzker and whatever. So there's a confluence. There's a confluence of also men in high places with these desires or preferences, and the economic and political incentives. let's see. Johnny Northman. It was developed and prepared quietly in the. I don't think. See, this is the thing. I don't agree that that it started in the academy. Of course, having Judith Butler and all these other type of left or progressive academics peddle this stuff about gender ideology and gender ID, and Judith Butler said there's something essentially masculine about the penis. Of course, that it helps. It bolsters it. That's definitely a part of it. But to say it started there because the feminine people in the academy don't have venture capital and startup capital to start producing all the drugs and the other medical practices and getting the state to codify a lot of this thing called gender identity that supersedes someone's biology, being male or female. It certainly helped. It certainly helps. It certainly gives it intellectual cover. It certainly gives it a panache. It's certainly helpful that Judith Butler is, still on the gender train. I don't dispute that. And that, a lot of academics will who didn't challenge us at all, who I used to think are just being cynical, but now of some of the people I met, I think maybe they're really believers. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, but it was unleashed with overwhelming force everywhere before anyone had a chance to even notice. Every reporter, every school teacher, McDonald's, Starbucks, etc., so they accepted this. Yeah. Again, I don't dispute, Johnny, that it seems like that. Yeah. But you have to remember that there was a time when this was going on that you hadn't picked up on it. And I hadn't picked up on it. There was people who've been trying to sound this alarm since I think like 2013, 2012 or 13. And I didn't look into this until 2019. That wasn't until a couple of friends of mine had gotten pushed out of the UK labor for women because they wouldn't go along with that trans women are women just like they are. And that's when I thought, okay, I need to look into this. What's going on? And that's when I got into, it didn't take me very long to realize it's something very bad. There was something progressive about this at all. That on the gender front, it was basically, old wine, new bottle, misogyny and homophobia. But then on the political economic front was really like, holy moly macaroni. So I would say that I don't dispute that it felt like it was, because also once I picked up on it, and then I start, it's like once you pick up on something or what's in your consciousness, you have a concept or beginning of a concept of it, you start seeing it all over the place. So I very much am sympathetic that it felt like out of nowhere, but there are people who are tracing this that say, no, this did not come from out of nowhere. And the reason why it seems like it did is because it's not a grassroots movement. It's very much a top-down movement that uses the pork trans kid or the teased whatever as cover, as emotional cover to push a kind of straightforward state economy coordinated effort. So that's what I would say is that if we're looking at this as a grassroots movement, then it seems really bizarre that all of a sudden, we have all this. It just seems like people, like somehow the memo went out, the memo went out, and all of a sudden we woke up one day and men could be women if they want to, and or we could be no sex or both sexes, or it's fluid, and if you say anything about it, and a kid can know at 3 if they're a girl or a boy, and then you should take them to the gender clinic, which is like this. I mean, I still think that Stephen King messed up. The Gender Clinic is like a total Stephen King horror movie or book waiting to be written after this passes. So Zuleika, it's a composite ideology. The historical context is definitely here. Just need to know where to look. The transsexual empire does a good job explaining it. Yeah. I agree. There's stuff there. There's a lot of people working on this from different angles, and some of them are aware of each other. But again, since especially the places that we would rely on to work on this have been so taken over. My word, GenderBorged, because it just seems like, again, I can talk to somebody who's so, I'll use the lady who was from the that I met a few days ago in London. So lovely, so sweet, so compassionate, so smart. But on this issue, just, it's like, you're dealing with a step. It's like, again, Borged, gender Borg. That's what I mean. I don't, it's crazy, or it seems crazy. So yeah. So, but again, so organizations that used to would be working on this, or be calling the alarm, have been so constrained or captured, or afraid of alienating or upsetting their newfound members, or there's some people, or they have a family member or a friend, or there's somebody in the organization that's gone trans or non-binary, and then again, the kindness thing, and it's very difficult. So there's people working a little bit over here. There's a lot of independent people. So you have Jennifer Billick, you have Redux. I'm missing some names. Various people who, and then we talk to each other, and also online. A lot of us are anonymous because of the pushback. You can lose your job, your reputation, canceled, so to speak. People have certainly been canceled because of this. So it's where the word TERF come from as well, is to shut this down. It's like, you're a TERF, you're dirt, you're, just basically a way of saying bitch or cunt if you dare question, the femininity of the trans man or trans woman. So, but slowly but surely, people are starting to get together, and courage does lend to courage. And the people who can't, either because they can't take the risk, the financial risk, or the social risk of speaking out, we find the people like me and others. I'm certainly there's people been doing way more than I have, don't get me wrong. But those of us who have, the mouths and the wherewithal to take the slings and arrows in terms of the name calling and all this stuff, those who can't, either because they can't risk losing their job, or they just don't have, not everybody can take being called these names, will support those who can, either unofficially or anonymously, or just, so it's all there. But there are people who are, the word's starting to get out slowly but surely, that it's not only ultra right-wing fascists, and of course right-wing, I mean, fascist is overused too, but that there's a lot of feminists, there's a lot of Marxists, there's a lot of whatever you want to call yourself. I still believe the majority of people in the planet, the vast majority, know that sex is real and that you really can't change it. But it's hard when we're social beings, when everyone around us seems to be going along with this. It's really hard to be the one that says, but that's a guy. I don't care what you tell me. Leah Thomas, just to stay on the sports theme, I don't care what you tell me, that's a guy. And it's demeaning to me. And they'll tell you that, oh, you're not being nice. No, well, it's not nice to us to make us lie. And for women, it's like, so what if putting on a dress or pretending to be a woman gives a guy's dingle-a-tingle, I'm supposed to affirm that gender identity? It's like, no. And I focus on the trans women, the men, because it's more, it's an easier target, and it impacts more, because men pretending to be women is more problematic than women pretending to be men for the other people around them. I'm not saying that lives aren't destroyed, and that, and that the uptake in women and and teenage girls wanting to be boys is not very problematic, but it's problematic in a different way. Let's see. So Zuleika, and I think that what was written before the turn from women's studies to gender studies. Yeah. I had friends. I minored in women's studies way back when I was going to college for doing my undergrad. And I remember I thought about this later, not at the time, but there was a tension between the so-called second phase women feminists in the gender studies department, or no, women's studies department, and the quote unquote third wave, who were like, everybody they all loved Judith Butler, and porn was empowering, and sex work is work, and all this stuff. But I think they also thought that, oh, that's just another fad. it'll blow over, not realizing that 10 years later or 15 years later, all of a sudden you don't have women's studies um, departments anymore. You have gender studies departments anymore, where the topic du jour and the totem, the most oppressed totem is the trans woman, which are men. It's an odd thing. Johnny Northman. Let's see. It's also a primary weapon used against multipolarity. Any country that doesn't accept Western liberal hegemony will be attacked as transphobic, and the West can sanction them. Yeah. I mean, we've seen this. I don't dispute this at all. And that's another thing why, like, how countercultural, how radical, how Marxist, Leninist, whatever you want to say, is this, when the CIA and the United States government and, well, I'll use Palestine as an example, and Israel can try to, what they say, pink wash this. So they'll be like, oh, the Israeli army, they have trans and you can be gay and it's like great, as if it matters, as if that makes it better. It's like, well, if the IDF's diverse, like in terms of trans and LGB, well then of course they're moral, and that just makes the genocide just a little bit less. I mean, yeah, it's just this idea that parity. And again, I don't want to make it seem like all the people in power got together and thought, this parity thing, we shouldn't fight this, we should want it. But the idea that it's beneficial for the look, if you can wrap U.S. foreign policy or Western foreign policy in with so diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, then it just seems like you're doing a good thing. No, we're doing the right thing, going in and sanctioning, bombing, starving, And what's sad, I'm not surprised that the CIA and the US government and Israel and the IDF uses it, but the fact that people who would say out there on the left will go with it. The fact that I've had people, when I've been resistance posting on since October 7th, given the fact that I've been following this issue since 2002 and I lived there for 2 years, would say things like, well, yeah, but Hamas hates gay people, so that's I'm on my side, or they'd kill people like me, so I know what side I'm on. And first of all, it's like, okay, why do you think that that Palestinians would kill you because you're gay? Where did that thought come from? So very much it very much what pink wash is what they call. So if and the United yeah, the corporations and the state have gotten and the intelligence apparatus have been very good at using these things to both recruit and to soften their image. So there'll be Black Lives Matter, there'll be trans rights now, there'll be LGBTQ, i.e., whatever it is. There'll be green wash, pink wash, rainbow wash, women wash. And what we have to accept, and Alexander was talking about this, is that somebody's sex, so male or female, whether they're same-sex attracted or whether they're heterosexual or bisexual or homosexual, whether they're a man who wants to be a woman or a woman who wants to be a man or whatever, tells us absolutely fucking nothing about their politics. Not one thing. Doesn't tell us anything about their politics. Doesn't tell us anything about their ethics or morality. Nothing. But it sure does look good on the screen and in the brochure. So how bad could the CIA be, or how bad could the IDF be if they're inclusive of they have the United Colors of Benetton drone unit or something? It's like, I guess the sanctions don't hurt if it's a woman who's sanctioning you. I mean, it's just all such craziness. But I think that it's also what when Alexander mentioned the lag, that in the 70s and 80s up to the 90s maybe, that obviously, yeah, if you looked at universities, if you looked at Congress, if you looked at the bureaucracies in the corporations, obviously these were white male dominant, and well, in the States and the UK, I'll use this as an example. Obviously they weren't white dominated in China. Anyway, focusing on the West, yeah, that most of these positions were white guy positions. Okay. Not anymore. Not anymore, and we have to update. Yeah. It's like it's also, you have certain professions that used to be dominated by men. I mean, in terms of quantity, whether or not the culture was, and how quick, how when quantity changes, the quality of an organization is different. So at what point if you go from having maybe 5% females to 30 or 40% females, does that quantitatively change the organizational culture or values? That's a different question, because the quantity is obviously easier to say. But there's, and you have some places where, I think the last evidence I saw, I don't know about the UK, but in the US, that in graduate school, there's more women graduating with graduate degrees now than men. So things are changing. But our ideas, our concepts, and sometimes our organizational politics, or I don't know what you want to call it, like superstructure, there's a lag. So you still have people who think they're fighting the same battles, or people who still think that being gay is like can get you killed, like everywhere. Now, in some places, being openly gay is dangerous for you. But people want to act like it's still that way, like the gay rights movement, both legally and culturally, didn't happen. Or that they want to tell you that nobody's more in danger of being killed for being what they are than trans women, which is also a lie. But they keep on saying it, and they believe it because they're in this ideology. Well, of course they would be. So there's also a lag. Our conceptual configurations, especially on the left, seem to be really kind of stuck. What Alexander said, and seeing the opposition in a particular way, and not realizing how culturally the opposition has changed in some ways. Now, not in all ways, but in some ways. Let's see. Zuleika, there's definitely evidence that the concepts are borrowed from pre-industrial society's faith. Yeah. Janice Raymond, I'm not familiar with her, but I will make a note of it. Let's see. Hugh Keenan, this topic does appear to eat away at energy and time that could be spent on more important issues that really impact men and women's everyday lives. Yeah, I mean, the thing is this issue has ideas can have material consequences. Yeah. So I totally agree that if someone had told me in 2018 that I would know all this stuff about intersex conditions and autogynephilia and how men's, typically not all men, of course we know this, that paraphilias with men tend to increase over time, and they tend to diversify. So they usually don't stay with one, which makes sense, because if you get off on something, then at a certain point, you need to either do it more or add something else to it to keep the spice up, which is why I think that, ironically, the more they want to mainstream and turn sexual proclivities into identities, the less these activities will give these people the rush that they used to. I mean, if everybody accepts it, then it's not transgressive at all. And I think that, and especially if it's to the degree that these are sexual things, which with men they tend to be, based on the research. But that's a bit of a downer, if you'll pardon the pun. But yeah, so it's become an issue. Yeah. So if you're in an institution, if you're out in public and you can't call a man, or without getting in trouble, if you have to pretend that people can choose whether they're a man or a woman, or neither, or if not, you can get in trouble. That's a problem. Again, the so-called gender medicine, so especially, I think it should be, I think it's barbaric even when it's adults. But if we just focus on kids, the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and people, 18-year-olds dying from flesh-eating diseases because their puberty was blocked too early and they didn't have enough penile tissue, so they had to use the bowel, and then it got infected, and then they died, and then it's just like, what? and trying to tell us this is progressive and it's about letting people, that trans kids aren't like vegan cats and who knows what. Or just the idea that we used to let kids have phases. When I was growing up, there was phases. People had a phase. Yeah. So the idea that, and I have 3 kids. Unfortunately, none of them have had any confusion about whether they're boys or girls, luckily. But I have to imagine that if my son at some point when he was younger said like, oh, I think I want to be a girl, I'd just be like, well, whatever. I wouldn't feed into it. Or if he was a bit older, I would ask him like, well, why do you say that? Why do you think that? But what I would not do is take him down to the gender clinic and change his name and put him on puberty blockers because I've decided in my head that since my son said these words, and maybe because he likes playing with stuff that's associated with girls rather than boys, that somehow he's actually a girl. I mean, just saying it out loud just seems so batshit crazy. But of course, we have a whole industry about this. And it's, yeah. So I totally agree that I would rather not be talking about this. But that I don't agree that it doesn't have a real impact, especially on women's lives. And of course, women and men, we tend to interact and be in each other's circles. So them as well. And of course, I know that there's the girls who decide they want to be gay men are, hanging out at gay bars and whatnot, and trying to live out their gay boyfriend fantasies, which I'm sure is not so nice for gay men, but maybe some of them don't mind. I don't know. But it doesn't affect men as more because, if a woman pretending to be a man goes into a male space, that's quite different than men pretending to be women going into female spaces for obvious reasons that I know that people here aren't going to be confused, like my friend or or the person I met, the comrade I met in London, who seemed to not understand what I was saying with that. Okay, so unless there's any more comments, I'm going to wrap it up there. Alexander, his audio video kicked out, but he let me know that he had an appointment at 4. So I'm sure that when his audio went out or his video went out, that he just thought there's no point in going on again. So anyway, so this was part 2 of what will probably be an ongoing drama until the fever has really broke and we can do a post-mortem on what really happened. I think that right now it's still it's a risk. So to speak out openly against gender ideology is a risk. And I don't dispute that. And if I was, up for tenure at a university, would I be speaking this directly? Probably not. I hope I'd still be speaking on it, but I can be honest enough with myself that I would probably choose my words a bit differently. But I think pretending that this is going to go away has not done us any good. It's just gotten worse and more entrenched in these institutions. So I don't know now how much of it is people who are true believers who seem to be totally groomed to actually believe all this stuff, and the people who are just trying to be nice to go along to get along, and then there's those who just don't like conflict, who wants to fight about this, especially if you want to focus on you want to focus on Israel Palestine or US foreign policy or UK foreign policy, if you want to focus on building working class organizations, you want to focus on housing or the opioid epidemic. Yeah. Dealing with this is, I can see why people avoid it. But what I would say from what I've seen is avoiding it has not worked. Well, it's only, and at what point it might, and it could be that the organizations, the people whose organizations have been overrun who've been transed or GenderBorged by this. It could be that the market saves them from themselves. So, for example, when you start having enough lawsuits from so-called detransitioners, especially minors who are like, why did you block my puberty? Why did you cut my breasts off? Why did you put this fake phallus on me? or not just kids. I think it'll start with the minors because that's more of a face case. You're going to get more sympathy from that. But also the other people, when the lawsuits start happening, and when insurance companies say we're not going to insure doctors who do the so-called gender surgery, then this might you might see people like Alexander said, kind of pretending like it never happened, or that they didn't support it, or they were always against it but just were scared. But I think that the same thing that has. I think there's still maybe a whole series of books to come out on how women's studies became gender studies. Maybe that was the canary in the coal mine. I don't know. Or maybe it was queer theory, French theory. I don't know. Parts of French theory don't. Some of it is not all of it is reactionary or libertine to the core, but a lot of it seems to be in practice, at least. I hope that people like the DSA or other, especially organizations that call themselves any kind of Marxist or socialist organization, especially Marxist organization, materialist organization, I hope that they do the hard work of figuring out how the flip did this happen. Were we so hungry for new followers? Were we so, I don't know what. But what I will say to end with is that it's quite clear to me, and I'm sure to most people who haven't been genderborged, either because and maybe they started off with when it was just to be nice, and then you say things and you're around things so often you start to convince yourself, or you start to, the people around you, that maybe trans women really are women, and maybe you can be no sex or both sexes, or maybe you can go back and forth and be male one week, female the other. I don't know. But what's clear to me, and I'm trying to find my slide on this. There we go. Here we go. Is that what's clear to me is that there's nothing materialist or Marxist about gender ideology, and actually gender ideology is actively or essentially, if one can use that word, anti-Marxist and anti-materialist. A materialist Marxist critique could be, aside from the biological one, I think just that the standard biology undermines gender ideology. But in terms of figuring out how it spread through the system, through the mode of production, if you will, that we're in, like seemingly like wildfire, that a materialist Marxist critique analysis would be the way to go. And I hope people don't shy away from looking at themselves and their organizations when they're doing this. So I put this up because after I shared some clips from Alexander and I's first episode on how the left was trans, and a lot of we upset the quote unquote nominally Marxist or materialist pronouns, as I like to call them, because they usually have pronouns in their bio, along with several other signifiers that they seem not to know what mean, that actually have meanings. So what I'll end with is that. So here's my manifesto. Here's the Morbid Symptoms Media manifesto on gender ID. That Marxism is not about liberating men from respecting women and girls' sex-based boundaries. Marxism is not about queering the boundary between man and women or child and adult. Marxism is not about the proletarianization of sex and reproduction by dystopian transhuman capital, aka Jennifer. Look at the Pritzkers, look at Rothblatt, so Stryker Corp and United Therapeutics, I think, and there's other big corporations, conglomerates that are involved. More genders, more money, or big, reproduction. Getting kind of alienating us from sexual reproduction is big money in that, and control as well. Marxism is not about magical thinking like prefixes that turn man into woman. Marxism is, now I just said what it's not, now I'm going to say what it is, an affirmative statement. Marxism is the science and politics of overcoming the capital labor contradiction of bourgeois society. That would be a minimum definition. So the most minimal definition of Marxism is I would say, is that you can have a maximal one, of course, because capital and labor is the primary contradiction, but not the only one. And so basically stop transing Marxism and go be with the they, thems and Pomo land. So if you want to believe this stuff and act this way and whatever, I'm not going to ban it or be like, purge you from society, but leave Marxism and materialism out of it, because it's the antithesis of that. And it's really unfortunate that the people who should have been the gatekeepers, the shepherds of these traditions, whether it be the science or the politics of Marxism, did such a piss poor job of protecting this. They let the wolves in, the wolves in, and trans flag clothing, or whatever. And I think they should look at that yeah. And again, we're all human. Things are tough. I know it's not easy. Believe me, I've seen people's lives be turned upside down because for saying basic things like biology is real and men aren't really no one's really actually transitioned. They're witches. Burn the witch, or the occasionally men have gotten under fire for this, but they really go after the women. They really go after the women who don't agree with this stuff. I guess they think because somehow we're supposed to be motherly and affirm their whim. I don't know, or they just don't like a woman telling them no, whether they be a man or a woman. Women are supposed to be like, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, so I went on quite a bit on my own. I hope it sounded okay. Like I didn't come off like I was, making a hostage video from some undisclosed location. For those of you who watch this, thank you for the comments. I really appreciate them. I think I put them all on the screen. This will be an ongoing thing because Alexander and I keep on running out of time. I really want to have an episode with him when we focus on what do we go from here? How do we how do we free ourselves? How do we free these organizations, especially organizations who were or who want to be at their core materialist Marxist organizations? How do we extricate them from this really pernicious, insidious, divisive ideology that unfortunately has material effects? All right. Thank you, everybody. If you can, please like and subscribe and at the end, I'll have a slide that has all the ways you can support Morbid Symptoms Media. Of course, I'm the main face of it, but there are other people who contribute, sometimes on screen and also behind the scenes, because they're not in a position where they can be so out and proud. if I can borrow that language. So please do, if you can, like and subscribe on the YouTube, on the X, on the Rumble. I also have a Patreon and a Substack. I know that economically things are very difficult. Everybody's asking you for money, but if you can support us monetarily, that's great. It will all go to me being able to spend as much time as possible on this project and not having to find a full-time job someplace else, because with 3 kids and a mortgage and all that, I can't go on forever with that unless it becomes somewhat financially self-sustaining. So anybody who can participate in that, please do. And of course, if you do, then you have an extra say on the content. So what we talk about, the guests we have, you'll get privileged. Your comments go to the front of the line, or whatever the way I can make you feel special for contributing financially to this project. I will try to do that. On that note, comrades, allies, friends, countrymen, countrywomen, humans, I will see you next time. Let's see. I always forget. I always say goodbye before I start the music, which is stupid. I should start the music and then say that. Here we go. All right. So, see you next time. Thank you very much.